Say his name again, and I'll forget this was ever just a job. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The room felt smaller anyway. Like the air had decided to listen. I didn't move. Couldn't. His hand wasn't even touching me, not yet, but the space between us felt charged, like the second before lightning hits. Alexander Volkov didn't raise his voice. He raised expectations. And somehow, I had already failed them. It hadn't started like this. It started with a number. $50,000. That's what he offered me to ruin a man's life. I remember staring at the contract on his glass desk, my reflection trembling in it like I didn't belong in that office. Like I didn't belong in his world. You don't need to love him, he said, standing by the window, Manhattan glowing behind him like it answered to him. Just make him fall. His tone was calm. Clinical. Like we were discussing business metrics, not a person. Not a heart. I should have walked away. I had every reason to. But rent was due. My mom's medical bills didn't care about my morals. And $50,000? That wasn't just money. That was oxygen. So I nodded. And that was the moment everything shifted. The moment I stepped into a game I didn't understand, with a man who never lost control. Alexander didn't look at me when I agreed. Not right away. He just adjusted his cufflinks, slow, precise, like time itself waited for him to finish. Then his eyes found mine. Dark. Measured. Unreadable. You'll meet him tomorrow, he said. Daniel. My brother. Brother. That word should have been a warning. Instead, it felt like a detail. Something small. Something I could handle. I didn't know then that Daniel Volkov was nothing like his brother. I didn't know he smiled like the world hadn't touched him yet. That he listened when I spoke. That he looked at me like I was more than a task. The first time we met, it wasn't dramatic. No storm. No music. Just a quiet coffee shop on the Upper West Side, the smell of espresso and rain clinging to the air. He stood when I walked in. Actually stood. Like it mattered. Emily? He asked, offering a soft smile. I nodded, already stepping into the role. Already pretending. That's me. I reached out my hand. He shook it gently. Not like a man trying to impress. Like someone who didn't need to. That was the first crack in the plan. And Alexander saw it. He always saw everything. Cameras. Reports. Men who followed us at a distance I could feel but never prove. I knew he was watching. But I didn't expect the way his attention started to change. At first, it was just check-ins. Short calls. Controlled questions. Is he responding? Are you making progress? I gave him the answers he wanted. Of course I did. That was the job. But then, the questions shifted. What did you talk about? Did he touch you? Did you smile like that for him, or was that real? And suddenly it didn't feel like a job anymore. It felt like a test. Like every moment with Daniel was being weighed, not for success, but for something else. Something I couldn't name yet. Until tonight. Until I said Daniel's name one too many times. And Alexander stepped closer, his presence filling every inch of space I thought I had. Careful, Emily, he murmured, his gaze locking onto mine like there was nowhere else I could exist. You're starting to forget who you belong to. Belong. That word hit differently now. Because somewhere between the contract, and the coffee, and the way Daniel looked at me like I was worth choosing, I stopped knowing the answer. I should have said something. Anything. I should have stepped back, laughed it off, reminded him this was business, not ownership. But the words stayed trapped somewhere between my lungs and my pride, because the truth was more complicated than fear. The truth was I did not know who I belonged to anymore. Alexander watched me like he was waiting for an answer I could not give, his eyes searching my face for something that felt dangerously close to honesty. I broke first. I always did. You hired me, I said quietly, my voice steady even though my pulse was not. That is all this is. For a second, something flickered across his expression. Not anger. Not disappointment. Something sharper. Something personal. Then it was gone. Replaced by that same controlled calm that made people listen before he even spoke. Is it? He asked, his tone almost curious. Like he was studying me instead of arguing. I hated that. I hated how easily he could shift the ground beneath my feet without raising his voice. You are getting distracted, he continued, stepping back just enough to give me space I did not feel. Daniel is not the objective. He is the path. The path. I repeated the words in my head like they would settle something inside me. They did not. Because Daniel did not feel like a path. He felt like a person. And that was the problem. The next morning, I met Daniel again. Same coffee shop. Same quiet corner by the window. But something had changed. Maybe it was me. Maybe it was the way Alexander's voice still lingered in my head, low and certain, reminding me that every smile I gave Daniel was being measured by someone else. Daniel noticed immediately. You look like you did not sleep, he said, sliding a cup of coffee toward me before I even ordered. I blinked, surprised. Do I look that bad? He smiled, soft and easy. No. Just honest. Honest. That word landed heavier than it should have. I wrapped my hands around the cup, letting the warmth anchor me for a second. Long night, I said. It was not a lie. It just was not the truth either. Daniel leaned back in his chair, studying me in a way that felt nothing like Alexander's gaze. There was no calculation in it. No control. Just curiosity. You can tell me if you want, he said. Or we can pretend everything is fine and talk about something else. I almost laughed. The choice felt unfamiliar. Dangerous in a different way. What would we talk about? I asked. He shrugged, a small smile playing on his lips. Anything that makes you forget whatever kept you up last night. And just like that I did. Not completely. Not permanently. But enough to feel it. The shift. The ease. We talked for an hour. About nothing important. About everything that mattered. Music. Books. The kind of places we would go if we did not have responsibilities pulling us back. And somewhere in the middle of it, I forgot to pretend. I laughed. Real laughter. The kind that catches you off guard and leaves you softer than you planned to be. And that was when it happened. That was when I felt it. Not from Daniel. From somewhere else. A presence. A weight. I did not need to look to know. But I did anyway. Across the street. Parked at the curb. A black car I had seen before. Once. Twice. Too many times to ignore. My smile faded before I could stop it. Daniel followed my gaze. Something wrong? He asked. I shook my head too quickly. No. Just thought I saw someone I knew. Another half-truth. Another lie wrapped in something believable. When I looked back, the car was still there. Engine running. Windows dark. Watching. He was always watching. And for the first time, it did not feel like protection. It felt like pressure. Like every moment I spent with Daniel was tightening something inside Alexander that he was no longer willing to ignore. That night, my phone rang before I even made it home. I did not need to check the caller ID. You laughed, Alexander said the second I answered. Not a question. A statement. I closed my eyes, leaning against the cold wall of my apartment hallway. I was doing my job. Silence stretched on the other end. Not empty. Heavy. Do not confuse performance with preference, he said finally, his voice quieter now. Closer. More dangerous in its restraint. Because if you start choosing him. He did not finish the sentence. He did not have to. I swallowed, my grip tightening on the phone. This was your idea, I reminded him. You told me to make him fall. Another pause. Then, softer this time, almost like he was speaking more to himself than to me. I did not say you could fall with him. And that was it. That was the moment everything tilted. Because for the first time, Alexander Volkov did not sound like a man in control. He sounded like a man realizing he was about to lose something he had never planned to want. Do not fall with him. I repeated the words in my head like they were supposed to mean something simple. Like feelings followed rules if someone powerful enough said them out loud. But feelings did not care about rules. They never had. And that was exactly what made this dangerous. I told myself I could fix it. That I could reset the balance. That whatever shift Alexander felt, whatever tension had started building between us, I could push it back into place by doing exactly what I was hired to do. So, I called Daniel. Dinner? I asked, keeping my voice light, effortless, like nothing had changed. There was a pause on the other end, just long enough to make my heart hesitate. I was hoping you would ask, he said finally, warmth in his tone that felt undeserved. Undeserved because I knew why I was really there. Undeserved because I was about to use it. We met that night at a small restaurant downtown. Nothing extravagant. No white tablecloths or crystal glasses. Just soft lighting, quiet music, and the kind of space that made everything feel more real than it should have. Daniel stood when I arrived again. That simple gesture. That consistency. It was disarming in a way I had not prepared for. You look different tonight, he said as I sat across from him. I smiled, controlled, careful. Different good or different bad? He tilted his head slightly, studying me in that thoughtful way that made me feel seen instead of analyzed. Different like you are deciding something. My breath caught for half a second. He was closer to the truth than he realized. Maybe I am, I said softly. And then I leaned into the role. I asked questions. Personal ones. The kind that build connection fast. The kind that make people open doors they usually keep closed. Daniel answered all of them. Not because he was naive, but because he trusted me. That was the difference. And the more he trusted me, the harder it became to keep pretending that I did not care. At one point, he reached across the table, not to pull me closer, not to claim anything, just to brush his fingers lightly against mine as if asking a question without words. It was gentle. Careful. The opposite of everything Alexander was. And somehow, that made it more complicated. I did not pull away. That was the second mistake. The first had been agreeing to the job. The third came seconds later. Because I looked up. And I felt it again. That presence. That silent pressure that did not need to introduce itself. This time, I did not have to search for it. He was there. Inside the restaurant. Standing near the bar like he had always belonged there, like the entire room adjusted around him without realizing it. Alexander. He was not looking at Daniel. He was looking at me. And there was no calculation left in his expression now. No distance. Just something raw and restrained that made my pulse spike for an entirely different reason. Daniel followed my gaze again, slower this time. More aware. Do you know him? He asked quietly. The question hung between us, heavier than anything we had said all night. I forced myself to look back at Daniel, to stay in the role, to keep the lines clear. No, I said. The lie tasted sharper this time. Because for the first time, I was not sure of who I was protecting. Daniel nodded, but something in his expression shifted. Not suspicion. Not yet. Just a subtle awareness that he was missing part of the picture. Alexander did not move closer. He did not interrupt. He did not speak. He just watched. And somehow, that was worse. Because it meant he was choosing restraint. And a man like him only chose restraint when control was slipping. Dinner ended too quickly. Or maybe not quickly enough. Outside, the city felt louder, brighter, harder to ignore. Daniel walked me to the curb, his hands in his pockets like he was holding himself back from something. I like spending time with you, he said, his voice steady but honest. And I get the feeling you are about to make that complicated. I let out a small breath, not quite a laugh. You always this perceptive? Only when it matters. That answer should have made this easier. It should have pushed me back into the role, reminded me of the objective, the path, the plan. Instead, it did the opposite. It made everything feel more real, more fragile, more dangerous. A black car pulled up to the curb before I could respond. Not a coincidence. Not timing. A decision. The window rolled down slowly. And there he was. Alexander. Get in, he said, his voice calm but final, like the conversation had already ended before it began. Daniel looked between us now, confusion settling into something sharper. Emily? He asked, searching my face for an explanation I could not give. I hesitated. Just for a second. But in Alexander's world, a second was enough. Do not make me repeat myself, Alexander added quietly. And that was it. That was the line I had been walking without seeing it clearly. The moment where choice stopped being abstract and became real. I looked. At Daniel. Then at Alexander. And for the first time, I realized this was never just about making one man fall. It was about deciding which one I would betray. I should have walked away. That was the simplest answer. The cleanest one. But nothing about this had ever been simple, and standing there between them, I felt it more clearly than ever. Daniel's eyes were still on me, searching, patient but not blind. Alexander's were different. Certain. Like he already knew what I was going to do before I did it myself. That was the problem with men like him. They did not wait for decisions. They anticipated them. Controlled them. And somewhere along the way, I had started letting him. Emily, Daniel said again, softer this time, like he was giving me space to choose instead of pushing me into it. That should have mattered more than it did. I turned to him, forcing my voice to stay steady. I am sorry, I said, and I meant it more than I expected to. His expression did not break. Not immediately. But something behind it shifted, something quiet and real that made my chest tighten. For what? He asked. Not accusing. Just honest. I hesitated. Because the truth would have destroyed everything in a way I could not take back. For leaving like this, I said instead. Another half-truth. Another fracture in something that had almost been real. Daniel nodded slowly, like he was filing the moment away, not reacting to it. You always leave when it starts to matter? He asked. The question landed deeper than anything else he had said tonight. I did not answer. Because I did not have one. Because I did not know if I was leaving him, or running from something else entirely. The car door opened with a quiet click behind me. I felt it more than I heard it. An invitation. Or a command. With Alexander, it was always both. I stepped back once, just enough to break the invisible line between Daniel and me, then turned and got into the car without looking back. That was the fourth mistake. The door closed softly, sealing me into a different world. One where the air felt cooler. Controlled. Measured. Like every breath had already been accounted for. Alexander did not speak right away. Of course he did not. He never rushed. Moments like this. The car pulled away from the curb, smooth and silent, the city lights sliding past the window like nothing had happened at all. But everything had happened. I could still feel Daniel's gaze lingering on me even after we turned the corner. Finally, Alexander spoke. You hesitated. His voice was low, even, but there was something underneath it now. Not anger. Not exactly. Something tighter. I turned my head slightly, just enough to look at him without fully facing him. I am human, I said. That tends to happen. His jaw shifted, almost imperceptibly. Not in my world. I let out a quiet breath. Then maybe your world is the problem. That got his attention. Fully this time. His gaze snapped to mine, sharp and immediate, like I had crossed a line he did not expect me to see. Careful, he said softly. You are starting to forget who you are speaking to. There it was again. That subtle reminder of power, of position, of control. But something inside me had already shifted. Maybe it was the way Daniel had looked at me. Maybe it was the way Alexander had watched me. Or maybe it was the realization that I was no longer just playing a role. No, I said quietly, holding his gaze this time. I am starting to remember. Silence filled the car again, heavier now, charged in a way that had nothing to do with fear. Alexander leaned back slightly, studying me like I had just become something new in his eyes. Something unpredictable. This is not a game, Emily, he said after a moment. It never was. I swallowed, my fingers curling slightly against my lap. Then why does it feel like one? His expression darkened, not with anger, but with something more complicated. Something closer to truth. Because you are still pretending you can walk away from it, he said. That landed. Harder than anything else. Because a part of me knew he was right. Not about everything. But about that. I looked out the window, watching the city blur past, trying to find something steady in the motion. Daniel does not deserve this, I said quietly. His response came immediately. Neither do I. I turned back to him, caught off guard by how quickly he said it. By how certain he sounded. You chose this, I reminded him. You started it. His eyes did not leave mine. And you accepted. That was the truth we kept circling back to. The contract. The deal. The moment I said yes. But it did not feel the same anymore. It did not feel contained. It felt like something that had already slipped beyond what either of us planned. I can still finish it, I said after a moment, my voice quieter now. More careful. I can make him fall. Alexander watched me for a long second. Then another. Measuring. Deciding. And when he finally spoke, his voice had changed again. Lower. Controlled in a way that felt forced now instead of natural. That is no longer the objective, he said. My breath caught. Then what is? He leaned slightly closer, not enough to invade my space, but enough to make the distance between us feel intentional. No, he said softly. The objective is you. And for the first time since this started, I realized I was no longer the one playing the role. I was the one being pulled into it. Now the objective is you. The words did not leave the air. They stayed there, settling into something heavier than a threat, something more permanent than a warning. I felt them before I understood them. The shift. The change in the rules. Because when Alexander Volkov changed the objective, it was never small. It was never temporary. It meant everything else had already been rewritten. That is not part of the deal, I said, my voice quieter now, more careful than I wanted it to be. His gaze did not move. Deals evolve, he replied. Of course they did. In his world, everything bent eventually. People. Plans. Even intentions. The car slowed as we turned onto a quieter street, the noise of the city fading just enough to make the silence between us louder. I could feel it pressing in again, that same tension that had started building the moment I stepped into this. Only now, it felt different. Closer. You are changing the rules because you are losing control, I said before I could stop myself. The moment the words left my mouth, I felt it. Not fear. Not exactly. Awareness. Because I had just said something most people would never dare to say to him. Alexander did not react right away. That was always the first sign. The stillness. The pause. Before something shifted. Then, slowly, he turned his head toward me, his expression unreadable but sharper now. Careful, he repeated softly, but this time it did not sound like a warning. It sounded like a boundary. And I had just stepped over it. Am I wrong? I asked, holding his gaze even though my pulse had started to climb. He watched me for a long second. Then another. And for the first time since I met him, he did not deny it. He did not confirm it either. He just let the silence answer for him. That was enough. The car came to a stop in front of my building, The engine still running, the world outside waiting like nothing had changed. But everything had. I reached for the door handle, needing distance, needing space to think, to breathe, to remember who I was before all of this started to blur together. Emily! His voice stopped me before I could open the door. I froze, my hand still resting against the handle. Slowly I turned back. Do not see him again, he said. Just like that. No explanation. No negotiation. A command wrapped in calm certainty. Something inside me tightened immediately. That was not part of the deal either, I replied, echoing my own words back at him, but this time they felt different. Stronger. Because now I understood what he was really asking. Not just compliance. Control. Complete control. His jaw shifted slightly, the smallest crack in that perfect composure. I am not asking, he said. I let out a quiet breath, shaking my head once, almost to myself. That is the problem, I said softly. You think everything belongs to you just because you decided it does. His eyes darkened, not with anger, but with something more intense. Something that felt personal in a way I had not expected. You said yes, he reminded me. You stepped into my world. I did not agree to disappear in it. I shot back. The words hung between us, heavier now, layered with something neither of us was saying out loud. Because this was not just about Daniel anymore. It had not been for a while. This was about something else. Something that had started the moment Alexander stopped looking at me like a tool and started looking at me like a problem he could not solve. You are not a problem I can ignore, he said suddenly, his voice lower now, more controlled in a way that felt deliberate. I blinked, caught off guard by the shift. I am not a problem at all, I replied, but the words sounded weaker than I intended. Because a part of me knew, in his world I was exactly that. An unpredictable variable. Something that did not follow the plan. Something that could not be controlled. And that was the one thing Alexander Volkov had never tolerated. Until now. He leaned back slightly, studying me again, but this time there was no distance left in his gaze. Just focus. Intensity. Decision. That is where you are wrong, he said quietly. You are the only thing in this that I cannot control. My breath caught. Just for a second. But it was enough. Because in that moment, I realized something that changed everything. He was not trying to control me because he wanted to. He was trying because he could not. And that difference was dangerous. Then maybe you should stop trying, I said, my voice softer now, not challenging, not defensive. Just honest. For the first time. He held my gaze, something unreadable passing through his expression, something that looked almost like hesitation. Almost. But it disappeared just as quickly as it came. I do not stop, he said simply. Of course he did not. Men like him did not stop. They adapted. They recalculated. They found new ways to win. And I was starting to understand. I was no longer part of the plan he created. I was the reason it was falling apart. I opened the door this time, stepping out into the night air, the cool breeze hitting my skin like a reminder that there was still a world outside of his. But as I walked toward my building, I could still feel his presence behind me, even without looking. Watching. Measuring. Deciding. And deep down, I knew this was not over. Because I had just done the one thing he could not predict. I had refused him. And men like Alexander Volkov did not lose control quietly. I did not sleep that night. Not really. I closed my eyes, but my mind kept replaying everything in fragments that refused to settle. Daniel's voice. Alexander's silence. The way both of them looked at me like I had already chosen something. I did not understand yet. By morning, the city felt different. Or maybe it was just me. The light coming through my window looked the same, the sound of traffic below steady and predictable, but inside, nothing felt steady anymore. I told myself I needed to reset. That I needed to step back into the role, finish what I started, and walk away before this became something I could not control. That was the plan. It almost sounded simple when I said it out loud. Almost. My phone sat on the table in front of me for a long time before I picked it up. I stared at Daniel's name on the screen, my thumb hovering just above it, hesitating for reasons I did not want to examine too closely. Then I pressed call. It rang once. Twice. Then his voice came through, calm but different now. More guarded. Emily. Just my name. No warmth wrapped around it this time. No easy familiarity. Something had shifted. Hi, I said, keeping my tone light, like last night had not ended the way it did. Like I had not stepped into a car with another man and left him standing there without answers. There was a pause. Not long. Just enough. Are you okay? He asked. That caught me off guard. Of all the questions he could have asked, that was the one he chose. Not where did you go? Not who was he? Just, are you okay? I swallowed, my grip tightening slightly on the phone. I am fine, I said. Another half-truth. He exhaled softly on the other end, like he did not fully believe me but was choosing not to push. Good, he said. Because last night did not feel normal. It was not. None of this was. I know, I replied quietly. That is why I wanted to see you. The words left my mouth before I could overthink them. Before I could stop myself. Another mistake. Or maybe, a decision. Silence stretched between us again, heavier this time, filled with everything we were not saying. Then finally, okay, he said. When? Relief and something else I could not name settled in my chest at the same time. Today, I answered. Soon. We agreed on a time. A place. Simple. Neutral. Like we were trying to rebuild something that had already cracked. When I ended the call, I sat there for a moment longer, staring at nothing, trying to ignore the quiet voice in the back of my mind reminding me of what Alexander had said. Do not see him again. I stood up anyway. Got dressed. Stepped outside. Because for the first time since this started, I was not sure I was following the plan anymore. I was choosing something. And that was more dangerous than anything else. The cafe was busier than usual, the late morning crowd filling the space with noise that made it easier to hide in plain sight. Daniel was already there when I arrived. Of course he was. He stood when he saw me, but this time, the gesture felt different. Not automatic. Intentional. Measured. Hey, he said. I smiled, softer this time, less controlled. Hey. We sat down across from each other, the same way we always had, but nothing about it felt the same. The space between us felt heavier, filled with questions neither of us had asked yet. Daniel watched me for a moment, his gaze steady but not intense. Just present. You look like you are about to tell me something important, he said. I let out a small breath, my fingers curling around the edge of the table. I might be, I admitted. He nodded once, leaning back slightly, giving me space again. Always space. Then I am listening. That was the problem. He always listened. And that made lying harder. I opened my mouth, ready to say something safe, something controlled, something that would keep the lines clear and the plan intact. But the words did not come out the way I expected. I have not been honest with you, I said instead. His expression did not change immediately, but something in his eyes sharpened, focused. About what? He asked. I hesitated. Just for a second. But it was enough. Because in that moment I felt it again. That presence. That silent pressure that had become impossible to ignore. I did not have to look. I already knew. He was here. Somewhere close enough to see. Close enough to hear. Close enough to remind me that every choice I made now had consequences. Daniel noticed the shift in me instantly. What is it? He asked, his voice quieter now. More serious. I forced myself to look back at him, to stay in the moment, to finish what I started. There is something you need to know, I said, my voice steady despite everything pulling at it. Because this was it. The line I could not walk back from. The moment where pretending stopped. The moment where truth would change everything. And somewhere, just out of sight, I knew Alexander was listening. There is something you need to know. The words left my mouth, but they did not feel like mine anymore. They felt heavier. Final. Like once they existed between us, there would be no taking them back. Daniel did not interrupt. He did not rush me. He just waited, his eyes steady on mine, patient in a way that made this harder than it should have been. Because he deserved the truth. And I was not sure I was brave enough to give it to him. I took a slow breath, my fingers tightening slightly against the edge of the table. When I met you, I began, my voice quieter now, more careful. It was not an accident. His expression did not change immediately. But I saw it. The moment something inside him shifted. Not surprise. Not yet. Just awareness. What do you mean? He asked. I swallowed, forcing myself to keep going, even as that familiar pressure pressed in around me again. He was here. I could feel it. Watching. Listening. Waiting to see what I would do. I was hired, I said. The words felt sharp as they left me. To get close to you. Silence fell between us. Real silence this time. Not the kind filled with unspoken tension. The kind that follows something that cannot be undone. Daniel leaned back slightly, his gaze never leaving mine, but something in it had changed completely now. The warmth was still there. But it was guarded. Measured. Hired by who? He asked, his voice calm but no longer soft. This was it. The line I could not step back from. I hesitated. Just for a second. But in his world, a second was enough. By your brother, I said. The words landed between us like something solid. Unavoidable. Daniel did not react right away. That was the first thing I noticed. The stillness. The control. For a moment, he looked almost exactly like Alexander. And that realization unsettled me more than anything else. Alexander, he repeated quietly. Not a question. A confirmation. I nodded once. His jaw tightened slightly, the only visible sign that something deeper was happening beneath the surface. And what exactly was the job? He asked. I closed my eyes for a brief second, gathering whatever honesty I had left. To make you fall, I admitted. Saying it out loud made it sound worse. Colder. More calculated than it had felt when I first agreed to it. Daniel let out a slow breath, his gaze dropping to the table for a moment before lifting back to mine. And did you? He asked. The question caught me off guard. Not because I did not understand it. But because I did. Completely. Did I what? I asked quietly. Did you make me fall? He said, his voice steady, but there was something under it now. Something real. Something that made this more than just a conversation. I hesitated. Because the answer was not simple. Because the truth was not clean. That was the plan, I said carefully. He shook his head once, almost to himself. That is not what I asked? I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time since this started, I stopped trying to control the outcome. I do not know, I admitted softly. And that was the truth. More than anything else I had said so far. Because somewhere between the plan and the person, everything had blurred. Daniel held my gaze for a long second, searching for something. Maybe sincerity. Maybe regret. Maybe a reason to believe that this was not entirely a lie. Why are you telling me this now? He asked. The question cut deeper than I expected. Because I had an answer. I just was not sure it was the right one. Because you deserve to know, I said. He watched me carefully, like he was weighing the words instead of accepting them. Or because something changed? He pressed. I felt it again then. That presence. Closer now. Stronger. Like a silent reminder that I was not alone in this moment. That every word I said had another audience. I glanced toward the window without thinking. And there he was. Across the street. Standing still. Watching. Alexander. Daniel followed my gaze this time. Slower. More deliberate. And when his eyes landed on his brother, everything clicked into place. I saw it happen. The realization. The connection. The truth unfolding in real time. He is here, Daniel said quietly. Not surprised. Not shocked. Just certain. I nodded once, my chest tightening. He has been watching the whole time, I admitted. Daniel let out a breath that almost sounded like a quiet laugh, but there was nothing light about it. Of course he has, he said. His eyes shifted back to me, sharper now. Clearer. So let me understand this, he continued. My brother hires you to get close to me, you start doing exactly that, and now you are telling me the truth while he stands outside watching? When he said it like that, it sounded exactly as complicated as it was. Yes, I said softly. He leaned back again, running a hand through his hair as he processed everything, his composure still intact but no longer effortless. And where does that leave you? He asked finally. The question hung there, heavier than everything else. Because I did not have a clean answer. Not anymore. I looked at him. Then toward the window. Then back again. I do not know, I admitted. And for the first time since this started, that uncertainty was real. Because this was no longer about the plan. Or the job. Or even the brothers standing on opposite sides of it. This was about something else entirely. Something I had not planned for. Something I could not control. And judging by the way Alexander was watching from across the street, either could he. I do not know. The words stayed between us longer than they should have, heavier than anything else I had said. Daniel did not look away. He did not fill the silence. He just studied me, like he was trying to decide if uncertainty was enough, or if it was just another version of the same lie. Outside the window, Alexander had not moved. He stood exactly where I had last seen him, still, composed, like time did not apply to him the way it did to everyone else. But I could feel it now. The shift in him. The loss of distance. The way his attention no longer felt like observation, but something closer to involvement. Daniel followed my gaze again, slower this time, more deliberate. When he looked back at me, something had changed. Not just awareness. Clarity. He did not expect you to tell me, Daniel said quietly. It was not a question. It was a conclusion. I shook my head once. No, I admitted. He did not. Daniel leaned forward slightly, his hands resting on the table, his posture calm but no longer relaxed. Then why did you? He asked. I hesitated. Because this was the part that did not fit into any plan. Because it stopped feeling like a job, I said. The truth landed softer than I expected. But it did not make things easier. Daniel's eyes held mine, searching again, but this time it was different. Not for answers. For intent. And what does it feel like now? He asked. I let out a quiet breath, my fingers tightening slightly in my lap. Complicated, I said. It was not enough. I knew it. He knew it. But it was the only word that did not fall apart when I said it out loud. Daniel nodded slowly, like he understood more than I was saying. Then he leaned back, his gaze shifting briefly toward the window again before returning to me. He is not going to let this go, he said. I followed his gaze instinctively, my chest tightening as I caught Alexander's eyes again from across the street. There was no anger there. No visible frustration. Just focus. Controlled. Intentional. And that was somehow worse. I know, I said softly. Daniel's jaw tightened slightly, the only sign that he was processing something deeper. He does not like variables, he added. And right now, you are one. I almost laughed, but there was nothing light about it. That makes two of us, I said. Daniel's expression softened for a moment, just enough to remind me of the version of him I had first met. The version that made this harder than it should have been. You could walk away, he said. The simplicity of it made something inside me pause. Because technically, he was right. I could leave. End the contract. Disappear back into a life that did not include either of them. But even as the thought formed, I knew it was not that simple anymore. Not really, I said quietly. Daniel watched me carefully, like he was waiting for me to explain. I did not. Because I did not have the words for something that had already gone too far to reverse. Outside, Alexander finally moved. Just a step. Just enough to shift the stillness that had surrounded him. But it was enough to change everything. Because now it felt like a decision instead of observation. Daniel noticed it too. Of course he did. His eyes narrowed slightly, his focus sharpening in a way that felt more like Alexander than I wanted to admit. He is coming in, Daniel said. My pulse quickened, my body reacting before my mind could catch up. Daniel, I started, but I did not finish. Because the door opened. And just like that, the space changed. Conversation softened. Movement slowed. Not because anyone knew who he was exactly, but because something about him made people adjust without understanding why. Alexander stepped inside like he had always been part of the room, his presence controlled, precise, impossible to ignore. He did not look around. He did not acknowledge anything except us. His gaze found mine first. Of course it did. And in that moment, everything else disappeared. He walked toward the table with measured steps, not rushed, not hesitant, just certain. Daniel did not stand. He stayed exactly where he was, his posture steady, his expression calm but no longer neutral. Waiting. Alexander stopped beside the table, close enough now that the distance between all three of us felt intentional. Calculated. Final. You told him, he said, his voice low and even, but there was something under it now. Not anger. Something sharper. I held his gaze, refusing to look away. Yes, I said. Silence followed. Not empty. Pressurized. Like everything that came next had already been decided. Daniel broke it first. Interesting strategy, he said, his tone calm but edged with something that had not been there before. Hiring someone to manipulate me, and then showing up to watch it happen. Alexander's eyes shifted to him, slow and deliberate. It was not meant to be a performance, he replied. And yet here you are, Daniel said. The tension between them settled into something deeper than simple conflict. Something older. More personal. And I realized then, this was never just about me. I was just the point where everything collided. Alexander looked back at me, his gaze softer for half a second before it sharpened again. I told you not to see him, he said quietly. I felt it again. That pull. That pressure. But this time, I did not step back. And I told you I would not disappear, I replied. Another silence. This one heavier than the last. Because now, there was no plan left. No role to hide behind. Just three people standing in the middle of something none of us could control anymore. And the worst part was, I was starting to realize this was exactly where Alexander had never wanted to be. Not in control. Not certain. Just involved. No one spoke for a second. Not because there was nothing to say. But because everything had already been said, just not out loud yet. Alexander stood there, unmoving, his presence filling the space in a way that made the rest of the cafe feel distant, irrelevant. Daniel remained seated, but there was nothing passive about him anymore. The ease I had seen in him before was gone. Replaced by something steadier. Sharper. And I realized then, they were more alike than either of them would ever admit. So this is what it comes down to, Daniel said finally, his voice calm but precise, like he was choosing each word carefully. You bring someone into my life, and then you decide you want to step in yourself. Alexander did not react immediately. He let the words settle, like he was measuring their weight before responding. "That was not the plan," he said. Daniel let out a quiet breath, almost like a laugh, but there was no humor in it. "No," he agreed. "It never is with you." The tension shifted again, deeper now, less about the situation and more about something that had existed long before I stepped into it. I felt it. The history between them. Unspoken. Unresolved. And suddenly, I was not just in the middle of a plan. I was in the middle of something far more personal. "This has nothing to do with you," Alexander said, his tone controlled but firmer now. Daniel's eyes flicked to me for a brief second before returning to his brother. "That is where you are wrong," he replied. "It has everything to do with her now." The words landed heavier than I expected. Because for the first time, I was not being talked about like a variable. I was being acknowledged like a choice. Alexander's gaze shifted back to me, and for a moment, everything else faded again. The cafe. The people. Even Daniel. It was just him and me, and the tension that had been building since the beginning finally surfacing without anything to hide behind. "Stand up," Alexander said quietly. It was not loud. It was not aggressive. But it was absolute. I did not move. Not right away. Because something inside me had already changed. Something that refused to respond automatically the way it had before. Daniel noticed. Of course he did. His posture shifted slightly, not defensive, not confrontational, just present. "You do not give her orders," he said calmly. Alexander's jaw tightened, just enough to show the crack beneath the control. "This does not concern you anymore," he replied. Daniel leaned back slightly, his gaze steady. "You made it my concern the moment you involved her." Silence again. But this time, it was different. It was no longer just tension. It was choice. Mine. And they both knew it. Alexander looked at me, his expression unreadable but his eyes sharper than ever. "We are leaving," he said. Not a question. Not a suggestion. I felt it again. That pull. That familiar weight of expectation that had followed me since the moment I agreed to his deal. But this time, something pushed back. "No," I said. The word was quiet. But it landed harder than anything else in the room. Alexander did not move. Did not speak. But I saw it. The moment something inside him shifted. Not anger. Not yet. Something more dangerous. Something closer to disbelief. Daniel did not say anything either. But I felt it. The subtle change in the air. Like everything had just tilted in a direction none of us could ignore anymore. "You are making a mistake," Alexander said finally, his voice lower now, more controlled in a way that felt forced. I shook my head once, holding his gaze. "No," I said again. "I am making a choice." That was the difference. And he knew it. Because for the first time since this started, I was not reacting to him. I was deciding something for myself. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything before it. Because now, there was no illusion left. No control to hide behind. Just three people standing in the middle of something that had already gone too far to undo. Alexander exhaled slowly, his gaze never leaving mine, like he was trying to recalibrate something that no longer responded to him the way it used to. "You think this ends here?" he asked quietly. I did not answer right away. Because I already knew the truth. It did not. It could not. Not anymore. "No," I said finally. "I think this is where it actually starts." His eyes held mine for a long second. And for the first time since I met him, I saw it clearly. Not control. Not certainty. Something else. Something that had been building beneath everything else. Something he had never planned for. And now, could not ignore. Because this was no longer about the plan. Or the deal. Or even the brothers standing on opposite sides of it. This was about something far more dangerous. Something neither of them could control anymore. Me. The word choice did not echo. It settled. It anchored something in me that had been shifting since the moment I said yes to a deal I never fully understood. And now, there was no stepping back from it. Alexander did not move. He did not argue. He just stood there, looking at me like he was recalculating something that no longer followed his rules. Daniel stayed seated, but there was nothing passive about him anymore. His attention was not divided. It was clear. Focused. On me. And for the first time, I realized they were both waiting for the same thing. Not compliance. Not explanation. A decision. Mine. Then say it. Alexander said quietly. His voice was controlled, but there was something underneath it now. Not pressure. Not exactly. Something more direct. Say what you are choosing. The simplicity of it made everything heavier. Because saying it meant owning it. And owning it meant there was no version of this where I could pretend it was still just a job. I let out a slow breath, my fingers curling slightly at my sides as I steadied myself. I am not part of your plan anymore, I said. His expression did not change immediately. But I saw it. The shift behind his eyes. The moment something stopped aligning the way it used to. You were never just part of the plan, he replied. That caught me off guard. Not because of what he said, but because of how easily it came out. Like he had already accepted something he had not said out loud yet. Daniel stood then, slow, deliberate, not stepping between us, not escalating anything, just present. Equal. Then maybe. It is time you stop treating her like one, he said calmly. Alexander's gaze flicked toward him, sharp for a second, then back to me. Always back to me. That was the difference now. I was no longer something in the background. I was the center of it. Whether I wanted to be or not. You think this is about control, Alexander said, his voice quieter now, more measured. It is not. I held his gaze, refusing to step back from it this time. Then what is it about? I asked. The question hung there, heavier than everything else. Because this was the part he had not said. The part he had been avoiding since the beginning. Alexander did not answer right away. Of course he did not. He never rushed anything that mattered. But this time, the silence felt different. Not strategic. Not calculated. Uncertain. And that was something I had never seen in him before. It is about what happens when something does not go the way it was supposed to, he said finally. His eyes did not leave mine. Not for a second. And you decide you do not want it to go back. My breath caught. Just for a moment. But it was enough. Because I understood what he was saying. Even if he was not saying it directly. Daniel watched the exchange carefully, his expression unreadable now, but I could feel it. The shift in him too. The way he was starting to see something that had not been clear before. You are not talking about the plan, Daniel said quietly. Alexander did not look at him this time. No, he replied. I am not. Silence again. But this time, it was different. Not tense. Not sharp. Just real. Because there was no pretense left. No version of this where any of us could pretend we were still playing roles. I swallowed, my voice softer now, but steadier than it had been before. Then you need to let me go, I said. The words felt final in a way nothing else had. Alexander's expression shifted slightly, something tightening behind his control. That is not how this works, he said. I shook my head once. That is exactly how this works, I replied. You hired me. I agreed. And now I am saying I am done. He stepped closer then. Not aggressive. Not abrupt. Just enough to close the distance in a way that made everything else fade again. You think you can walk away from this like it never mattered? He asked quietly. I held his gaze, even as my pulse picked up. I think it mattered more than you expected, I said. And that is why I need to. That was the truth. The part one had not said out loud until now. Because walking away was not about escape anymore. It was about stopping something before it turned into something neither of us could undo. Daniel watched us, silent, but I could feel it. The weight of his presence. The understanding settling in. The realization that this was no longer about him in the way it started. And maybe, it never really was. Alexander exhaled slowly, his gaze never leaving mine, like he was standing at a line he had never had to face before. "You do not get to decide when this ends," he said. I felt it again. That pull. That pressure. But it did not land the same way anymore. Because something inside me had already changed. "I already did," I said quietly. The words did not shake. They did not hesitate. They just existed. Solid. Certain. And for the first time since this started, Alexander Volkov did not have an immediate answer. Because control only works when the other person allows it. And I did not anymore. "I already did." The words stayed there, steady and unshaken, even as everything around them shifted. Alexander did not respond right away. That was the first sign something had truly changed. Not the silence itself. The absence of control inside it. He stood there, closer than before, but not closing the distance further, like something invisible had finally drawn a line he could not cross without consequence. And for the first time, he respected it. Daniel noticed too. Of course he did. His posture did not change, but something in his expression settled, like he had just understood something about his brother that had never been clear before. "You are serious," Daniel said quietly, his eyes still on me. Not surprised. Just confirming. I nodded once. Yes. That was all it took. No explanation. No justification. Just truth. Alexander exhaled slowly, his gaze dropping for a fraction of a second before returning to mine. That alone was enough to tell me everything I needed to know. He was not recalculating anymore. He was processing. And those were two very different things. "You think walking away solves this?" he said, his voice lower now, stripped of the edge it had carried before. "It does not." I held his gaze steady despite the way my pulse reacted to him standing this close. "Maybe not," I said. "But staying does not either." Another silence. This one quieter. Less sharp. But somehow heavier. Because now, it was not about control anymore. It was about consequence. Daniel stepped forward slightly then, not to interrupt, not to insert himself, but to stand on the same level. Equal. "She is not something you get to decide for," he said, his tone calm but firm. Alexander did not look at him. Not immediately. His focus stayed on me, like everything else had faded out again. "And you think you do?" he asked. Daniel shook his head once. "No," he replied. "I think she decides for herself." That landed differently. Because it was not a challenge. It was an acknowledgement. And that was something Alexander had not given me from the start. I felt it then. The shift settling completely. The dynamic breaking in a way that could not be reversed. I was no longer between them. I was separate from both. "This was never supposed to go this way," Alexander said quietly. I let out a small breath, not quite a laugh, not quite anything else. "That seems to be the problem with plans," I said. "They do not account for people." His eyes held mine, something unreadable moving through them again, but this time, it was not sharp. Not controlled. Something closer to understanding. "No," he said. "They do not." Daniel glanced between us, slower this time, more aware of what was being said without being said. "So what happens now?" he asked. The question settled into the space like something final. Because there was no strategy left. No roles. No script to follow. Just truth. I took a breath, steadying myself, grounding in something that finally felt like mine. "Now. I leave," I said. Alexander's expression did not change dramatically. But I saw it. The moment something tightened. Not resistance. Not anger. Something closer to realization. And you think it ends there? He said. I shook my head once. No, I replied honestly. I think it changes there. That was the difference. Ending implied control. Changing meant letting go of it. And that was something neither of them was used to. I reached for my bag slowly, deliberately, giving neither of them a reason to stop me, because there was nothing left to stop. Daniel stepped back slightly, creating space without being asked. Always space. Always choice. Alexander did not move. He stayed exactly where he was, watching me in a way that felt different now. Not possessive. Not commanding. Just present. And that somehow felt more intense than anything before. I stood up, the motion simple but final, and for a second, no one spoke. No one interrupted. Because they both understood. This was not something they could redirect anymore. I turned slightly, ready to leave, but then I paused. Not because I had to. Because I chose to. I looked at Daniel first. I am sorry, I said quietly. Not for the plan. Not for the lie. For the part that had been real and complicated and unfinished. He nodded once, his expression softer now, but not broken. I know, he said. And somehow, that was enough. Then I turned to Alexander. This time, the silence between us felt different. Not tense. Not unresolved. Just honest. You should not have hired me, I said. His lips pressed together slightly, something almost like a smile, but not quite. No, he admitted. I should not have. That was the closest thing to an apology I would ever get from him. And strangely, it felt like enough too. I held his gaze for one last second, letting the moment settle without trying to define it. Then I turned and walked away. No one stopped me. No one followed. But as I stepped out into the city again, the noise rushing back and around me, I knew something had not ended. It had shifted. Because walking away does not erase what happened. It just changes what comes next. And somehow, I had a feeling this was not the last time our paths would cross. Not because of a plan. Not because of control. But because some choices do not let you go that easily. I thought distance would make it easier. That once I stepped out of that cafe, out of their world, everything would fall back into something recognizable. Predictable. Mine. But the truth was, distance did not erase anything. It just gave it room to settle. And what settled was not simple. The next few days moved differently. Slower in some ways. Louder in others. I went back to my routine, or at least something that looked like it from the outside. Work. Errands. Conversations that did not mean anything. But underneath all of it, there was something else. A quiet awareness that never fully left. Like a shadow that did not follow me, but stayed close enough to remind me it could. I did not hear from Alexander. Not a call. Not a message. Nothing. And somehow, that silence said more than anything he could have said out loud. Because men like him did not disappear. They waited. Daniel was different. He called once. The next day. I let it ring. Not because I did not want to answer. But because I did not know what answering would mean. The second time he called, I picked up. Hey, he said, his voice softer than before, but steadier. Like he had already accepted something had changed. Hey, I replied. There was a pause. Not uncomfortable. Just careful. I have been thinking about what you said, he continued. About all of it. I leaned against my kitchen counter, my fingers tracing the edge without really noticing. I figured you would, I said quietly. He let out a small breath, almost like he was choosing his words the same way I was. You could have walked away without telling me, he said. But you did not. I closed my eyes for a second, letting that settle. That does not make it better, I replied. No, he agreed. But it makes it real. Real. That word again. It followed me now. stayed with me in ways I had not expected. "What do you want, Daniel?" I asked finally. Not because I did not know, but because I needed to hear it out loud. There was a longer pause this time. Then, "I want to understand where this leaves us," he said. I opened my eyes, staring at nothing in particular. "It leaves us complicated," I said. Honest. But incomplete. He did not push. Not immediately. "And if it did not have to be?" he asked. The question lingered. Because part of me wanted to believe that things could be simple again. That whatever had happened between us could exist outside of everything else. But I knew better now. "It does," I said softly. "It has to be." Silence followed. Not empty. Just accepted. "Okay," he said after a moment. No argument. No pressure. Just understanding. That was the difference with him. Always understanding. "Okay," I echoed. When the call ended, I stayed where I was for a while, letting the quiet fill the space again. And for the first time since I walked away, it felt like mine. But it did not last. Because later that night, as I stepped out of my building, the air cooler, the street quieter, I felt it again. Not fear. Not tension. Recognition. I did not have to look far. He was there. Leaning against a black car like he had always been part of the street, part of the city, part of something I could not fully leave behind. Alexander. He did not move when I saw him. Did not step forward. Did not speak. He just watched. And somehow, that felt more deliberate than anything else he could have done. I walked toward him slowly, not because I had to. Because I chose to. "You waited," I said when I was close enough. His gaze stayed on mine, steady, unreadable. "You left," he replied. Not an accusation. Just a fact. I nodded once. "I did." Silence settled between us again, but it was different now. Not sharp. Not unresolved. Just aware. "And yet here you are," I added. His expression shifted slightly, something subtle but real. "I told you," he said quietly. "I do not stop." I let out a small breath, not quite a laugh. "No," I said. "You do not." Another pause. This one heavier. Because now, there were no distractions. No third presence. Just him and me. And everything that had changed between us. "You walked away," he said again, his voice lower now. "And you expected that to be the end." I shook my head slowly. "No," I admitted. "I expected it to be different." His eyes held mine, something unreadable moving through them again. "And is it?" he asked. I hesitated. Because the answer was not simple. Because distance had not done what I thought it would. It had not erased him. It had not simplified anything. It had just made the truth clearer. "Yes," I said finally. "It is." He studied me for a long second. Like he was trying to understand something that did not fit into his usual logic. "Then why are you still here?" he asked. The question landed deeper than anything else. Because I knew the answer. I just had not said it out loud yet. "Because walking away did not mean I stopped feeling it," I said quietly. His expression did not break. But something behind it shifted. "Feeling what?" he asked. I held his gaze steady now, no hesitation left. "You," I said. And for the first time since this started, there was no plan behind it. No role. No control. Just truth. "You." The word did not echo. It did not need to. It stayed there, suspended between us, simple and unguarded in a way nothing else had been since the beginning. Alexander did not respond immediately. Of course he did not. But this time, the silence was not control. It was impact. I saw it in the way his gaze shifted, just slightly, like something inside him had been forced to adjust to a truth he had not planned for. "You should not say things like that unless you mean them," he said finally, his voice lower now, more measured than before. I held his gaze steady, not stepping back this time. I do not say anything I do not mean anymore, I replied. That was the difference. No role. No performance. Just honesty. And somehow, that made this more dangerous than anything that came before. He studied me for a long second, like he was searching for hesitation and finding none. And what exactly do you think that changes? He asked. I let out a quiet breath, my hands settling at my sides as I grounded myself in something that felt real for the first time in a long time. It changes the part where I pretend this was just a job, I said. It was not. Not anymore. Another silence. But this one felt different. Not unresolved. Not heavy. Just clear. Because now there was nothing left to hide behind. Alexander pushed himself off the car slowly, closing the distance between us by a single step. Not enough to overwhelm. Just enough to shift the space again. Intentional. Always intentional. You walked away, he said, his eyes never leaving mine. You ended the deal. I nodded once. I did. He tilted his head slightly, like he was considering something beyond what I could see. And yet you are standing here telling me you still feel it, he continued. I did not hesitate. Yes. That was the truth. And for once, it did not feel like a weakness. It felt like a choice. He exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing just enough to notice. You make things complicated, he said. I almost smiled. You made them that way first, I replied. That earned the smallest shift in his expression, something that almost resembled amusement, but softer. Less guarded. For a moment neither of us spoke. The city moved around us, cars passing, lights shifting, people walking by without noticing anything unusual. But in that moment, none of it mattered. Because for the first time, we were not reacting to a plan. We were standing in something real. I do not do halfway, Alexander said finally. His voice was quiet, but there was weight behind it. Certainty. If you step back into this, it is not temporary. I held his gaze, letting the meaning settle fully before I answered. I am not stepping back into anything, I said. He frowned slightly, the smallest crack in his understanding. Then what are you doing? I took a slow breath, feeling the difference in it, the clarity that had been missing before. I am choosing something new, I said. Not your plan. Not his expectations. Not the version of me that said yes for the wrong reasons. His eyes searched mine deeper this time, like he was trying to see if there was anything uncertain left. There was not. And what does that choice look like? He asked. I stepped closer then. Not because he pulled me in. Because I decided to close the distance myself. It looks like honesty, I said softly. Even when it complicates everything. Another pause. But this one felt settled. Like something had finally found its place. Alexander looked at me for a long moment, and this time, there was no control left in it. No calculation. Just something real. You are not what I expected, he said quietly. I let out a small breath. Neither are you. That was the truth. The simplest version of it. And maybe the most important. Because expectations were what started all of this. And letting go of them was what changed it. He nodded slightly, like he accepted that, even if it was not something he was used to. Then we start without them, he said. Not a command. Not a plan. A possibility. I considered it for a second. Then I nodded once. We start without them, I agreed. And just like that, everything shifted. Not into something easy. Not into something predictable. But into something real. Something chosen. Because in the end, it was never about who controlled the story. It was about who decided to stay in it. And for the first time, that decision was mine.